On this Thursday morning, the U.S. Senate about to gavel in to begin the day. Lawmakers will start with a bill reauthorizing Food and Drug Administration user fees. And then at 10:30, they'll turn to a pair of nominees for the Federal Reserve. Votes on those nominations are scheduled for noon Eastern. And now live to the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal Savior, like a shepherd, lead us. Much we need your tender care. Lead our senators today away from cautious complacency and from impulses which can bring regrets. Lead them toward the freedom that trusts your providence and believes that in everything you work for the good of those who love you. Lord, give us all by your grace pure hearts that love only the highest and clean minds that seek only the truth. Let nothing deflect us from your path, so we will always follow you and never lose our way. We pray in your sovereign name. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., May 17, 2012. To the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Tom Udall, a senator from the state of New Mexico, to perform the duties of the chair, signed Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader is recognized.
I now move to proceed to calendar number 400.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 400, S. 3187, a bill to amend the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to revise and extend the user fee programs for prescription drugs and medical devices, to establish user fee programs for generic drugs and biosimilars and for other purposes.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're now on the motion to proceed to FDA user fees legislation. I now ask consent that following my remarks and those of the Republican leader, the time until 10:30 be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or the designees, with the Republicans controlling the first half and the majority controlling the final half.
Without objection.
Mr. President, therefore, at 10:30 today, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the Stein and Powell nominations. Both are nominees to the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. At noon, then, there will be 2 votes on confirmation of their nominees. At this stage, there likely will be no more votes after that, but we'll keep everyone advised as to what is going to happen. I now ask consent that Mark Labonte, a detailee on Senator Johnson's Banking Committee staff, be granted floor privileges for the remainder of this day.
Without objection.
Mr. President, when someone that we love gets sick, the only thing on your mind is how to help them get well, how to get them the care they need. But every miracle drug or innovative new device comes to market, there's a rigorous approval process to make sure that that device or that medicine is going to be safe. To get life-saving drugs and devices to the patients who need them as quickly and as efficiently as possible, Congress must give the Food and Drug Administration the tools it needs to review and approve these products. Today, the Senate will begin consideration of legislation which gives FDA the resources to ensure medical devices, drugs, and treatments are safe and effective. I applaud the work of my colleagues, Senator Harkin and Senator Enzi, to bring this legislation to the floor. These 2 fine senators have different political philosophy on things generally, but they work well in this committee, and I'm very proud of each of them. I consider them both friends, and bringing this bill to the floor in the manner that they did is indicative of the work that needs to be done around here more often. So I hope to see the strong bipartisan effort that these 2 senators began continue as the Senate considers this important legislation. The Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act authorizes the FDA to charge manufacturers of new medical devices user fees. These fees are used to ensure their products are reviewed quickly and thoroughly before they're approved. But this legislation does more than maintain the status quo. It also enacts crucial reforms that will prevent drug shortages and bring life-saving medicines to market more quickly. It will save high-tech jobs in the medical field, make new treatments available to patients quickly, and preserve America's role as a global leader in the biomedical innovation. The legislation will expedite the processes of approving new drugs and medical devices, including many designed for children, while ensuring these products are safe for consumers. It will help spur the innovations that bring the next groundbreaking cancer or Parkinson's drug to market. The bill will hold foreign manufacturers who sell drugs in the United States to the same high standards met by American companies. It's extremely important, Mr. President, because of all the misleading attempts by these manufacturers to sell stuff on the Internet. And it will help prevent drug shortages by opening up the lines of communication between manufacturers and the FDA. The Senator from Minnesota, Senator Klobuchar, and the junior senator from Pennsylvania, Senator Casey, have been leaders in this drug shortage issue, and I applaud them. They're doing this to safeguard Americans' health. Every day, hospitals across the country experience shortages of life-saving FDA-approved drugs and treatments. Mr. President, as most senators know, my wife has been ill with cancer, and she had 20 weeks of chemotherapy. Every week, we were worried that that drug wouldn't be there on that Monday morning at noon when she got the treatments. Fortunately for us, they were, but that is the way it is with everyone around the country. People who need these life-saving medications have found those medicines not available, and we have to do everything we can to stop that. These shortages threaten public health and prevent patients from getting the care they need. Shortages of one drug used to treat a rare form of childhood leukemia, a drug that's an effective cure, in 90% of those cases have literally put young lives at risk by not having those drugs. And this, when I say 90% curative rate, it's amazing. One of my high school buddies had a son that was playing Little League Baseball. And running around the bases, he just couldn't do it. And this was a macho family, all these tough boys in the family, and they were really concerned that he was not being as aggressive as he should be. He had leukemia, and this boy died. There was nothing they could do for him. He died. Now, Mr. President, 90% of these cases are cured. And I've spoken on the floor before, others have. There's one form of leukemia that has been almost stopped in its tracks by the scientists discovering a bush called periwinkle, that they use the products from that little weed to cure cancer. So we need to do everything we can to make sure that these life-saving drugs are available. No mother or father should have to watch a child suffer as he waits for life-saving medicine. But as the number of drug shortages increases each year, more parents wait and worry. More husbands and wives and daughters and sons wait and worry. In 2005, the FDA reported shortages of 55 medications. Last year, the number jumped to 231, including the leukemia drug I just mentioned and some chemotherapy medicines. These shortages are caused by a variety of factors: problems at factories, limiting manufacturing capacity, or lack of raw materials. Or, Mr. President, another thing that we've learned, these manufacture these products, they want to be able to sell everything. They don't want to waste valuable money on storing medicines. One of the big businesses used to be in America is warehouses storing things. But this business in Reno, Nevada, we were a big warehouse storage area because we had no tax on storage. But anymore, there's not as much being stored because manufacturers determine that's a waste of money. And that's one of the things happening with these pharmaceuticals. Some, though, Mr. President, are caused by lack of financial incentive for profit motive is what it is, which is nothing wrong with that, but companies simply don't manufacture enough because they don't make enough money. Public awareness and pressure have prompted drug makers to voluntarily notify the FDA of many impending shortages, preventing almost 200 more shortages last year than I just talked about. But Congress can and must do more to improve communication between drug makers, the FDA, hospitals that provide this crucial care. Passing this legislation without delay will be a leap forward in that process. That's why last night I said, and I say today, I hope we don't have to file cloture on a motion to proceed to this life-saving legislation. Let's get on this legislation. Let's not waste. If we have to vote on cloture on this thing Monday, then we can't get on this thing until Wednesday and start legislating. How foolish. We'll have amendments. I've had a number of Republican senators come to me and say, we want to be able to offer amendments, relative amendments. Good, let's do it. If someone has a problem with this bill, don't stop us from going to it. Offer an amendment. If it's a worthy cause, we'll vote with him or her and get rid of what's in that legislation. But don't hold up the legislation. And so I would hope if my Republican colleagues have one of the senators that's holding this up, that they would talk to him and say, don't do that. It's making us, the Republicans, look bad. And it does, Mr. President. So I hope we can get on this legislation and work to make the health care delivery system in America more effective and efficient. Would the chair announce the business of the day?
Under the previous order, the time until 10:30 will be equally divided between the two leaders or their designees, with the Republicans controlling the first half and the majority controlling the second half.
Mr. President.
Senator from Kansas is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to address the Senate as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, thank you. Our nation's founding fathers amended the United States Constitution more than 2 centuries ago to guarantee a Bill of Rights for its citizens. Since then, our democracy has stood strong, and Americans have enjoyed liberties and freedoms unparalleled in the world, including the fundamental right to keep and bear arms guaranteed by the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. Today, our freedoms and our country's sovereignty is in danger of being undermined by the United Nations. To ensure our liberties remain for generations Today and for the future, I'm offering legislation to protect the rights of American gun owners from the effects of any UN arms treaty. In October of 2009 at the UN General Assembly, the Obama administration voted for the United States to participate in negotiating an arms trade treaty, a reversal of the previous administration's position. This treaty is supposedly intended to establish, quote, common international standards for the import, export, and transfer of conventional arms, unquote, including tanks, helicopters, and missiles. However, by threatening to include civilian firearms within its scope, the Arms Trade Treaty would restrict the lawful private ownership of firearms in our country. Whether that's true or not depends upon what the treaty actually says. Less than 2 months from now, the UN Conference on Arms Trade Treaty will take place in New York, and that presumably will determine the language that's ultimately included, as the treaty will be finalized for its adoption. Given where the process stands today, I'm concerned that this treaty will infringe upon the Second Amendment rights of American gun owners. I'm also concerned it will be used by other countries who do not share our freedoms to wrongly place the burden of controlling international crime and terrorism on law-abiding American citizens. Currently, proposals being considered by the Preparatory Committee at the UN would adversely affect U.S. citizens. I have several concerns with these proposals. First, there's been regular calls for bans or restrictions on civilian ownership of guns Americans use to hunt, target shoot, and defend themselves. Secondly, by requiring firearms to be accounted for through their lifespan, the Arms Trade Treaty could lead to a nationwide gun registration. This despite evidence that the costly bureaucratic system has been a complete failure in solving any crime or stopping criminals from getting access to guns everywhere it's been tried. Third, other proposals could require the marking and tracking of all ammunition, including ammunition for civilian sale and use. To make certain that our country's sovereignty and the rights of all Americans are protected, as the administration negotiates the treaty, I have introduced Senate Bill 2205, the Second Amendment Sovereignty Act. And this legislation is simple and straightforward. First, it says that the administration cannot, quote, use the voice, vote, and influence of the United States, unquote, to negotiate a treaty that in any way restricts the Second Amendment rights of American citizens. This is a common sense requirement that even the administration maintains. In an August letter I received from the U.S. State Department, the State Department wrote, the administration will not agree to a treaty that will infringe upon the constitutional rights of American citizens. We will not agree to treaty provisions that would alter or diminish existing rights of American citizens to manufacture, assemble, possess, transfer, or purchase firearms, ammunition, and related items. This bill will back up the administration's position and hold them to that pledge. Second, Senate Bill S-2205 specifically prohibits the administration from seeking to negotiate a treaty that regulates the domestic manufacture, possession, or purchase of firearms and ammunition. In other words, this bill seeks to maintain the sovereignty of our laws within our borders. UN member states regularly argue that no treaty controlling the transfer of arms internationally can be effective without controlling the transfers inside a country's own borders. This, in my view, is totally unacceptable. Again, the administration indicates they agree, saying that, quote, it will oppose any efforts to address internal transfers. Congress should hold them to that pledge. At stake is our country's autonomy and the rights of American citizens as protected by our Constitution. More specifically, the legislation that I've introduced seeks to ensure that U.S. citizens will not be subjected to restrictions on the use or possession of civilian firearms or ammunition. It prohibits the administration from negotiating a treaty that would result in domestic regulation of civilian firearms like hunting rifles that are often mischaracterized as military weapons, small arms, or light arms. Civilian firearms must be excluded from any arms trade treaty. The preparatory committee meetings have made it clear that many UN states aim to craft an extremely broad treaty that includes civilian firearms within its scope. For example, Mexico and several countries in Central and South America have called for the treaty to cover, quote, all types of conventional weapons, regardless of their purpose, including small arms and light weapons, ammunition, components, parts, technology, and related materials. If those provisions were included in a treaty, that treaty would be incredibly difficult to enforce and would pose dangers to all U.S. businesses and individuals involved in any aspect of the firearms industry, from manufacturers to dealers to consumers. Mr. President, I urge my colleagues here in the Senate to adopt this common sense legislation. On July the 22nd of last year, 57 U.S. senators joined me in, and therefore a bipartisan number, joined me in reminding the Obama administration that our firearms freedoms are not negotiable. We notified President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton of our intent to oppose ratification of a treaty that in any way restricts American Second Amendment rights. Our opposition is strong enough to block any treaty from passage, as treaties submitted to the United States Senate, of course, require two-thirds approval to be ratified. So as the treaty process continues, the Second Amendment Sovereignty Act seeks to further reinforce the administration's stated position that our country's sovereignty and firearms freedom must not be infringed upon by an international organization made up of many countries, most who have little respect for gun rights. America leads the world in export standards to ensure arms are transferred for legitimate purposes, and this legislation will make certain that law-abiding Americans are not wrongfully punished. In the days ahead, I'll continue to work with my colleagues to ensure that an arms trade treaty, if the negotiations result in one, if that treaty undermines the constitutional rights of American gun owners, it will be dead upon arrival in the United States Senate. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I notice a lack of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The senator from Wyoming is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today.
The Senate is currently in a quorum call.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask a unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today, as I have week after week since the President's health care law has been signed, to talk as a doctor, someone who's taken care of patients all around Wyoming, someone who's run the Wyoming health fairs, giving low-cost medical screenings to thousands and thousands of citizens around our state, and someone who knows we needed health care reform in a way that was giving patients the care that they need from the doctor that they want at a cost they can afford. And there were so many promises made with this health care law that I come week after week because there are so many broken promises. And today I wanted to remind the body that former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi once predicted that the health care reform, she said, quote, will create 4 million jobs. She said it would create 4 million jobs, 400,000 jobs, she said, almost immediately. Well, it's now 2 years later, Mr. President, and we know that actually the exact opposite is happening. We continue with high unemployment. We continue with people out of work, unemployed, underemployed. And the promise, both from the President of new jobs and of Nancy Pelosi of 4 million jobs, is another broken promise. Instead of creating jobs, this new law is destroying jobs all across the country. They say, how is it that they could actually be destroying jobs? Well, that's exactly what we're seeing as a result of the health care law. Recently, columnist George Will wrote about how the President's law will impact Cook Medical. It's the world's largest family-owned medical devices company. He explained in his column that the Democratic Congress, quote, included in the legislation, and all the people on that side of the aisle voted for this, included in the legislation a 2.3% tax on gross revenue. Not profits, we're talking gross revenue, which generally amounts to about a 15% tax on most manufacturing profits. From U.S. sales of medical devices beginning in 2013. So it's something that's happening very, very soon. This will be piled, as he says, on top of the 35% federal corporate tax plus state and local taxes. Mr. Will went on to say that this 2.3% tax will be a $20 billion blow to an industry that employs more than 400,000 people. And $20 billion is almost double the industry's annual investment in research and development. Well, we want them to do research. We want development. We want new and innovative treatments that will actually help people. Instead, this administration, the Democrats in Congress, in the House and in the Senate, and the President of the United States put a 2.3% tax, $20 billion blow to those who do the research and the development. This tax is going to lead to fewer jobs, but also fewer pain-reducing and life-extending inventions, stents, implantable defibrillators, which all have reduced health care costs in mind. And that's a quote from the article. So Cook Medical isn't the only medical device company that's bracing for the President's new penalty on jobs and innovation. In fact, let's take a look at some of those. Boston Scientific. It's planning for more than $100 million charge against earnings in 2013, and they recently built a $35 million research and development facility. Well, this is called Boston Scientific, Boston. Where did they build their research center? Ireland. And they're building a $150 million factory. It's called Boston Scientific in China. That's a result of what we see with this health care law and the impact of what this administration is doing to jobs in America. Stryker Corporation, based in Michigan, blames the tax for 1,000 layoffs. Zimmer, based in Indiana, is laying off 450 and taking a $50 million charge against earnings related to this tax. And these are companies that, as an orthopedic surgeon, have made new advances in technology, in artificial joints over the years that I've practiced in Wyoming, companies that have long-standing reputations and yet laying off people because of the new health care law. American workers. Medtronic. Medtronic expects an annual charge against earnings of $175 million. Other companies now Covidien, now based in Ireland, has cited the tax in explaining 200 layoffs and a decision to move production to Costa Rica and to Mexico. Once again, the column by Mr. Will makes it clear that the President's health care law is destroying jobs and is having a devastating impact on our economy. In March, Senator Coburn and I released our third health care law oversight report. We entitled the report, Warning, Side Effects, a Checkup on the Federal Health Law. One chapter in our report is dedicated to the health care law's job-killing medical device tax. It's a tax that multiple studies and economic analysis predict will negatively impact job creation and also, incredibly important for people around this country, it will stifle medical innovation. As an orthopedic surgeon, I can tell you I have seen firsthand how cutting-edge medical technology, it saves lives, and it also supports jobs across the country. Now, scientists have invented medical devices like pacemakers, defibrillators, artificial joints that have improved the quality of life for so many Americans. But now, today, because of this health care law, the future of the medical device industry in America is under attack. In September of 2011, the Manhattan Institute issued a report showing the devastating impact of the President's device tax on industry. The Manhattan Institute's report shows that the medical device tax will eliminate at least 43,000 American jobs. This number represents more than 1 out of every 10 jobs in the device manufacturing sector. It is not a record that the Democrats should be proud of, but it is clearly a record caused by the other side of the aisle, the Democrats, and specifically the President who signed this bill into law. Not only will this tax kill 43,000 jobs, workers are going to lose about $3.5 billion in wages. This is money that these workers could have spent in their local communities, helping the economy of those communities and therefore the nation's economy. So what does all of this mean to U.S. device manufacturers? Well, these companies are more likely to close their plants in the United States. They will close plants here and do what others have done, replacing them with plants overseas. Foreign manufacturers will improve their competitiveness compared to American firms. This will severely threaten U.S. leadership in the device industry and in the world. Do we really want to see plants closing at high-tech medical device research facilities in states like Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, New Mexico, New York, and Wisconsin? And finally, the President's medical device tax is going to increase costs to American consumers. These are the American consumers who said what they wanted with a health care law is care they need, the doctor that they want, at a price they can afford. Yet this health care law is going to increase costs to American consumers. The Congressional Budget Office, they have warned that the health care law's tax imposed on medical device manufacturers and drug manufacturers and health insurance providers would be passed through to the consumers in the form of higher insurance premiums. Wasn't it the President, though, who promised that under his health care law, insurance premiums would lower by $2,500 a year? Is that a promise that the President has forgotten or Democrats in Congress have forgotten? The American people haven't forgotten, which is why the health care law is even more unpopular today than the day that it was signed into law. The administration's own chief actuary, medical actuary, Richard Foster, he came to the same conclusion. He said that he estimated that these taxes would be passed through to health care consumers in the form of higher drug prices, higher device prices, and higher insurance premiums. If the administration wants to get serious, and I really wonder if this administration wants to get serious, if the administration wants to get serious about reducing regulatory burdens and about creating good jobs, then the President should start today by repealing his onerous medical device tax. Not only will this device tax suppress job creation and limit economic growth, it will also slow and perhaps even stop research and development into new, life-saving medical devices. We must take action to repeal this anti-competitive, job-destroying device tax before it begins to take effect in 2013. If the White House wants to work with Republicans on pro-growth policies, policies that support innovation, policies that get the nation's economy moving again, then President Obama would support repealing this device tax. Senator Orrin Hatch has introduced legislation, S-17, that would do just that. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of that bill, Mr. President, and I believe the Senate should take up the Hatch bill and pass it. But, Mr. President, as we are now 2 years after the passing and signing into law of the President's health care law, I will continue to come to the Senate floor because this is a health care law that is bad for patients, it's bad for providers, the nurses and the doctors who take care of those patients, and it's terrible for the American taxpayers. We need to repeal and replace this broken health care law. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
The Republican leader is recognized.
Are we in a quorum call?
Yes, we are.
I ask consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Yesterday in the Senate, we got a vivid look at why the challenges we face in this country are so difficult to address. With a looming fiscal crisis, some have called the most predictable in history, with a national debt at a level none of us ever even imagined, with millions unemployed and millions more underemployed, with the biggest tax hike in history looming at the end of the year, and with entitlement programs like Medicare and Social Security drawing ever closer to insolvency. Here's what Senate Democrats did yesterday. They ducked. They were presented with 5 different options for dealing with these problems, and they voted against every single one of them. Now, no one was particularly surprised to see Democrats reject the Republican proposals. We hoped that some of them would support them, but we weren't altogether surprised that they didn't. But every American should be surprised that Democrats didn't offer a single plan of their own, not one, not a single plan of their own, and that they didn't even support the plan offered by the President of their own party. But sadly, that's what passes for leadership in the Democrat-led Senate these days. Oppose everybody else, even including a president of your own party, and hope nobody notices you're not doing anything yourself. Most people would say it's the responsibility of the party in power to propose solutions, and they'd be right. The problems we face are simply too serious and too urgent to avoid any longer. And yet Democrats continue to duck any responsibility for addressing them. We certainly saw that yesterday. I would imagine there are some Democrats this morning who are having second thoughts about their party's performance yesterday. And if I'm right about that, I would invite them to stand up and to work with us. put aside what's politically safe and do what's right. The problems we face are too great to put off for another day. It's time for all of us to come together and to act. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I suggest the item.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Okaka. Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President, Senator from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President,
The Senate is currently in a quorum call.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to call off the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the Senate floor to debate and oppose the two Federal Reserve nominees that President Obama has sent to the Senate. But first, let me say I think it's very important, very good, very healthy that we're having this debate and we're having these votes. That's how the Senate should operate, particularly on very, very important presidential nominations. And, Mr. President, these certainly fit into this category. The Federal Reserve is an extremely important body for all sorts of reasons, but I would mention three in particular. First of all, it sets monetary policy, and that is a very important economic tool and set of economic policies. And right now, this Federal Reserve under Chairman Bernanke has an unprecedented policy of zero interest rates, easy money for an extended period of time, which is historically unprecedented. Secondly, the Federal Reserve is the primary regulator of our nation's biggest banks, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, and another that's been in the news quite a bit in the last few weeks, J.P. Morgan Chase. Now, obviously, all of these entities were involved in the recent economic crisis. So again, the Federal Reserve is extremely important as those mega banks' primary regulator. We should be talking about that. And finally, Mr. President, the Federal Reserve has other important authority and responsibilities, including in situations where they have taken action to bail out these mega banks. They have that authority. They also have authority to issue regulations under Dodd-Frank. All of these reasons are reasons why these two nominations are extremely important. And, Mr. President, that's why I demanded this debate and these votes. Fundamentally, I demanded this debate, these votes, for two reasons. First of all, I oppose these nominations. I am voting no. There was a UC promulgated, and that UC, had it been accepted, would have meant a yes vote for me. I couldn't vote that way for the reasons I will explain. Secondly, more broadly, I think it's important we have this debate and we have these votes, and this used to be the norm in the U.S. Senate. You know, between 1994 and 2000, all but two nominations to the Federal Reserve Board were voted on by the U.S. Senate. Yet since 2001, that's flipped for some reason. Since 2001, only two nominees have received votes. 10 members, 10 nominees, were confirmed to the Board of Governors without a recorded vote. I think that's unfortunate, and I think this is the proper way for the Senate to do its business, particularly when such important issues are at stake. Now let's talk about those issues. First of all, monetary policy. The Federal Reserve's primary responsibility, one of its two huge mandates, is to set healthy, proper monetary policy for the United States. Now, personally, I think that should be its only mandate. There are efforts here in the Congress to move the law to that position, but it's certainly a major role of the Federal Reserve and extremely important. What's more, this Federal Reserve under Chairman Bernanke in this economy has set monetary policy in an unprecedented way. And that's not editorializing. That's just a factual assessment, a factual description, because this Federal Reserve has set essentially a zero interest rate policy, an extremely easy money policy for an extended period of time, a very long period of time, without any end in sight, and that has never before happened. There are many experts, economists, commentators who think this is very dangerous policy, and I share their concerns. I don't pretend to be an expert as they are. I don't pretend, quite frankly, to have the economic training and background of Chairman Bernanke and others. But those who do, many of those who do, have grave concerns with this unprecedented easy money policy. Let me just mention a few. Dr. Alan Metzler, professor at Carnegie Mellon, sees signs of this building up future inflation and a weakening dollar, and believes the Fed did great harm in these categories with its quantitative easing 2, so-called QE2. Dr. Metzler has read Fed minutes for years and has written the definitive history of the Fed, and says that the central problem is there is a lack of discussion of alternatives and consequences of their policies. Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City President Thomas Hoenig said the Fed's plan to push down long-term interest rates may produce very adverse accidental outcomes, and policymakers risk creating real imbalances in the economy. He said, quote, "I have real concerns about trying to fine-tune and micromanage the economy when monetary policy is a blunt tool," close quote. Richard Fisher of Dallas said he believes the Federal Reserve's monetary policy has yet to show evidence of working. He's the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas president. He says in particular the Fed's plan to buy $400 billion of long-term bonds while selling the same amount of short-term debt is benefiting financiers and not aiding job creation. Philadelphia Fed President Charles Plosser, in a speech on the economic outlook to the Business Leaders Forum at Villanova School of Business, expressed extreme skepticism with that so-called Operation Twist, trading long-term debt for short-term debt. And he really didn't think it would encourage business investment or consumer spending. Quote, "I dissented from these decisions because I believe that they will do little to improve the near-term prospects for economic growth or employment, and they do pose risks," close quote. So there are very legitimate, strong concerns which I share on the current monetary policy of this Federal Reserve. And it is very clear from the statements of these two nominees that these two nominees will support that policy, will support that direction for the foreseeable future, will not provide dissent, will not provide alternative viewpoints. In addition, let me mention three other things about the Fed. As I mentioned, the Fed in general is the primary regulator of the mega banks. And still, I believe we do not have adequate focus and adequate regulation in that category. And I would only point to the recent disastrous announcement of J.P. Morgan Chase. Also, the Fed, with 5 affirmative votes, passes regulations under Dodd-Frank under its authority. That process is ongoing right now. Now, why are these two nominations significant in impacting the development of those Dodd-Frank regulations one way or the other? Well, it's pretty simple. Those Dodd-Frank regulations coming out of the Fed need 5 affirmative votes. Right now, there are 5 members of the Board of Governors. So they need to reach complete unanimity with regard to those regulations. When the negative impact, possible impact of those regulations is such a threat, I think that required unanimity is actually very healthy and a real protection. These 2 new members of the Fed changed the map, changed the requirement from needing 5 out of 5 to needing 5 out of 7. I think that will significantly push these regulations to the left, if you will, and require and therefore produce less consensus that those with economic viewpoints such as mine would like to see continue. And in the same vein, the Fed is certainly significant, not only regulating the mega banks, but in instances like 2 years ago, bailing out the mega banks. And they have that authority and they have that role. Just as with Dodd-Frank regulations, that requires 5 affirmative votes of the Fed board. Again, right now, before these 2 confirmations, that would mean 5 out of 5. It would require unanimity. I think that's healthy, actually, with regard to such an extreme measure as huge taxpayer-funded bailouts as we've seen in the last 3 years. If these 2 new members of the board nominees are confirmed, that math, again, would change in exactly the same way. The requirement would move from 5 out of 5 to 5 out of 7. It would shift the outcome to the left, if you will. It would make it much more likely that the Fed would act sooner to bail out mega banks with taxpayer funds. I have all of these concerns about these nominations. These 2 nominees are fine, decent men. They're smart. They're qualified in the professional sense. However, they clearly also support the current direction of Chairman Bernanke and the Fed. And for that reason, I cannot support the nominations, and I have real concerns. But in closing, Mr. President, let me say that at least I think it's positive that we're having this debate and that we're voting. As I cited, that used to be the norm in the United States Senate, including with regard to Federal Reserve Board of Governors nominations. These are very important nominations because of monetary policy, because of their regulatory authority, because of bailouts and Dodd-Frank and all the rest. It's more important now more than ever because of the unprecedented nature of Chairman Bernanke and the Fed's monetary policy and because of the history of the last 3 years. We need this debate. We need these votes. I don't think spending about 2 hours on it on the floor of the U.S. Senate is too much to ask. So I'm glad I asked for that. I'm glad I demanded that. And with that opportunity, I'll be voting no. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back my time, and I also suggest the absence of a quorum.
Will the senator withhold his request?
I will.
Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations, which the clerk will report.